This video was created by Iowa APSI board members, none of whom are legal experts. This video should not be used as legal advice or legal opinion. All opinions expressed herein are those of Iowa APSI Board of Directors. Since the early 1800s, people with disabilities have been routinely institutionalized in state-operated farms, hospitals, or similar facilities by other names. It wasn't until the 1950s and 1960s that the movement to deinstitutionalize people was brought on by impassioned parents and families who were loudly and ferociously critical of the isolation and abuse occurring throughout the country. Their advocacy brought significant national attention and federal policy changes and a shift towards community-based care. In 1981, Iowan Katie Beckett became the namesake for a waiver that led to home and community-based services waivers for people who were institutionalized. Katie spent the first 3 years of her life in a hospital on a ventilator, 12 hours a day, because Medicaid would only pay for it in a hospital, even though doctors had cleared her to receive the care at her home for 1/6 the cost. In 1990, Iowa's own Senator Tom Harkin, working with many other prominent leaders and disability advocates, helped pass the Americans with Disabilities Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in all areas of public life to promote equal participation and integration of people with disabilities. In 1999, the Supreme Court made a landmark decision for people with disabilities, referred to as the Olmstead Decision, which requires that public entities, like the state of Iowa, provide community-based services to people with disabilities in the least restrictive environment. Even after decades of the disability integration movement and civil rights protections in place, the state of Iowa has and still is unnecessarily institutionalizing people with disabilities and violating their rights. In the early 2000s, the state of Iowa was found to have violated the law by failing to provide adequate community-based services for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Although the state entered into a consent decree in 2004 with the U.S. Department of Justice, it reverted back to its old ways, which included casting people away into institutions rather than allocating the resources needed to support full community inclusion. In 2019, in response to complaints received about the Glenwood Resource Center, the Department of Justice launched an extensive investigation into the conditions at the state-operated institution. Though the initial investigation was focused on specific allegations, it sparked a second investigation into the inappropriate institutionalization of people with disabilities in the state of Iowa. Following their initial investigation, the DOJ concluded that the conditions at Glenwood Resource Center violated the federally protected civil rights of individuals living there. It was recognized that these violations followed a pattern or practice of resistance to full enjoyment of rights protected by the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Among other protections, the 14th Amendment of the Constitution says that no state shall deprive any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Specifically, the Department of Justice concluded that Iowa operates Glenwood in a manner that has subjected its residents to unreasonable harm and risk of harm in violation of their 14th Amendment rights by exposing them to uncontrolled and unsupervised physical and behavioral experimentation, inadequate physical and behavioral health care, and inadequate protections from harm, including deficient safety and oversight. The Department of Justice investigation reports are important and a sign of a larger, ongoing issue in Iowa. With a nearly 30-year history and pattern of violations of the rights of individuals with disabilities, the federal government and disability advocates are demanding a serious approach, including major changes to the service delivery system in Iowa. Iowa's administration of the resource centers and its long-term care service system leads to the unconscionable segregation of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, as resource center residents can receive appropriate services in their own homes and communities and do not oppose doing so. Secondly, Iowa has failed to address known deficiencies in the availability of community-based services and supports that contribute to the needless institutionalization of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And thirdly, Iowa exercises insufficient oversight of managed care organizations and home and community-based services to prevent unnecessary institutionalization. On December 1, 2022, the Department of Justice announced a proposed consent decree with the state of Iowa to resolve allegations that conditions at Glenwood Resource Center violated the United States Constitution. A consent decree is an agreement that resolves a dispute between two parties in this case, the Department of Justice and the state of Iowa. The decree outlines the specific actions the state needs to take in order to resolve the department's claims that the state exposed residents of Glenwood Resource Center to unreasonable harm and serious risk of harm by subjecting them to uncontrolled and unsupervised experimentation, inadequate physical and behavioral health care, and inadequate protection from harm. There are over 300 separate provisions in the decree, many of which the state has been aware of and working towards over the last several years. This consent decree does not resolve the other DOJ notice regarding the unnecessary institutionalization of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in Iowa, violating Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. However, ongoing negotiations are occurring, and a consent decree for that will be forthcoming. Now is a critical time to use your voice. Iowa has long witnessed and recognized the institutionalization of people with disabilities as a pattern of egregious behavior. The consent decree and investigation are just one step in a longer process of moving Iowa away from institutions to community-based settings. If done poorly, the transition could include disastrous results for Iowans and their communities. Hasty decisions and poor understanding of the impact on Iowans could mean people not having adequate care and dying as a result, moving people directly to nursing homes or ICFs or RCFs, another violation of people's civil rights, frequent turnover of staff, resulting in poor care and outcomes, which unfortunately is what we see now. Managed care organizations and systems denying care to Iowans based on dollars rather than their needs, and rural communities having poorer outcomes than the more urban areas of the state. Iowa requires an explosion of expectations now, whether it's providers of services, government officials, families, or communities. We all should expect people with disabilities to receive quality services in the most integrated settings possible. This will look like a system of 1. Regular monitoring and oversight of services so we don't end up in this situation again. 2. Investing money now and in the future toward these changes and not towards institution-based settings. 3. Appropriate staffing for community-based services, including employment supports, which help people with disabilities reach their goals, reduce reliance on public benefits, and support full community inclusion. 4. Understanding civil rights. And 5. Expansion of waivers and community alternatives to institutions. We need you to keep this issue top of mind in our communities, legislature, and for the Department of Health and Human Services. You can advocate for continued transparency and compliance by attending Iowa Medicaid's monthly town hall meetings and support ongoing monitoring by the Health Policy Oversight Committee. Iowa APSI will continue sharing resources throughout the year, including talking points and ongoing updates and information. Check the video description for pertinent information and links associated with topics discussed in this video. In addition to Iowa APSI, you can also follow the efforts of groups such as the Olmsted Consumer Task Force and Upgrade Medicaid. Please reach out to Iowa APSI at iowa.apsi@gmail.com with any questions.